It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting through my website, emailrevealer.com, or you can just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, be sure and check out our Patreon. We have, just putting up about 8 hours of new content every month on the Patreon, Opperman Report Patreon. And of course, you can always find us, our archives are free at Spreaker.com. You can go there and just Google Opperman Spreaker. And our guest today, we've had him on before. I think we had him on twice before. And you can find his archive shows up there on Spreaker.com. We have Tony Sperl, who's a private investigator from California. He's an animal activist guy there. And he's all mixed up with a lot of stuff. Tony Sperl really gets into stuff, man. Last time we had him on, we were talking about Bill Manson, who was the... convicted of killing Roy Radin, and also now Tony's gotten some involvement with the Manson family. So Tony, are you there?
I'm here. Hi, Ed.
How you been, man? And remind the audience, who is Tony Sperl?
Yes. Well, Ed, I started my career as a probation officer like 40 years ago, and then I became a policeman. And then I went into private investigations in real estate. I got to say, you're right. I mean, the Mincer link, Bill Mincer and I both worked for Larry Flint as bodyguards. The Manson link, the Italian Mafia in Southern California, and all of these people. And a lot of people might even say that I'm lying, but I'm not. If I had been born in Denver, Colorado, I wouldn't have run into all these people and all these cases. And it's just because I happen to be from Los Angeles and mobile, and I grew up with a lot of people from Hollywood. I've had entree to these different avenues, and hence why I'm here today. It's just something that started. This is November, 3 years ago. In November, I bumped into the Manson family.
Hey, but before we get into that, because you're in the book, Nicholas Schreck's book, my audience will be very familiar with Nicholas Schreck, the author, and he wrote a book called The Manson File, Myth and Reality of an Outlaw Shaman. But before we get into that, what is going on with Manson these days? You still in touch with him?
With who?
Bill Manson.
Oh, okay. Bill's still in prison. They've been in lockdown because of COVID. As a matter of fact, which is really funny, Bill and I have had a lot of conversations about you. I think Bill, at this particular juncture, Bill evidently somehow got a hold of your podcast. He listened to it. Bill is in good health. He's in his early 70s. He still works out. I think in the state of California, they have some new legislation where they're letting inmates out, and he's not going to be one of them, obviously, because he went down for double homicide. So what's happening with Bill? He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, and he's reconciled to it.
Okay, but you say he liked the show I did about him.
No, he liked the show. He liked the show. So,
do you think he would ever do an interview with me?
Probably not.
Why not?
Actually, he won't. I asked him. He won't.
Yeah.
Because of, you know what's funny, Ed? Everybody listens to you.
I know.
And that is true. They do.
I know.
And they're writers and different people. Because of doing that show, do you know how many letters he got from people asking for interviews?
Yeah.
And Bill said absolutely not. I mean, a ton of people actually hit him up for interviews off of that particular show.
So now, the thing is, when we were talking about Manson in our previous interview, right, because there was some talk that he was described as the second Charles Manson, right, and that he was involved with this satanic cult, the Protestant church and stuff, and you always said, no, he's a health nut. Where do we stand on that whole story? Is that the same version we're sticking with?
The same, and this goes to Nicholas Schreck.
Yeah.
Nicholas Schreck and I have had long conversations about this. Okay. And I'll go another step, because do you know that Bill actually spent time racking his brain whether he had ever, because the allegation had been made that he knew Abigail Folger.
Okay.
And he racked his brain and he said the time frames are all wrong. Number one, he definitely did not know anybody in the Manson family. He had nothing to do with them. He was in the Marine Corps at the time. He went to Vietnam. And most of his time when he was stateside in the Marines, he was in Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. So there's no connection there. When he got out of, I'll throw one. People who listen to your show are going to love this. When he got out of the Marines, he went to work for Jack LaLanne.
Right.
Remember the health nut Jack LaLanne? Because Bill Mincer had been on the Marine Corps bodybuilding team. So he went to work for Jack LaLanne. And that's where he thought, well, maybe he knew Abigail Folger, except, again, the time frame was wrong. Those people were already dead by the time he was out of the Marines. So there is absolutely no connection between him and the Manson family at all, or any of the people that were involved in it.
And then how did he come to murder Roy Radin? He had no connection to the Process Church either?
He's claiming that there was no Process Church connection. Nicholas Schreck, again, who was involved with the Church of Satan and Anton LaVey, Schreck is claiming that his statement that he had no connection to the Process Church is correct. That Mincer is not involved in that. I think the consensus, and Nick and I sat down and had long conversations on this. I really think that the bottom line is, though I'm not speaking for Bill Mincer, because Bill Mincer denies this, but I think the rational thought here is Bill Mincer is just a plain hitman. He's a hitman. He gets paid to kill people. Period. There you go. My opinion.
So then, are you aware of any other assassinations he could have performed besides the ones he's convicted of?
No, but there are other people that actually have approached me that believe that he did, but they never provided any other additional facts. So, and I don't think at this particular juncture either that law enforcement's interested in him. He's gone.
Yeah.
The guy's locked up. He's never going anywhere.
But the other allegations, would these be names we would know?
No, these would be. Well, actually, it's one person that worked with Bill that holds a grudge against him. So, that's the main person making that allegation. But no, I mean, I think that it's if you look at the life of Bill Mincer, we go back on this. Here's a guy that grew up in Los Angeles, so he's got connections to Hollywood just like I did. He went in the Marines. He came out. He's a martial artist and a bodybuilding guy. Goes to work for Jack LaLanne. Through Jack, he was able to beat people in Hollywood. He was able to do his private investigations, his security, and like that. And one thing led to another. And, he was convicted on 2 separate murders. One involved Roy Radin, and one was referenced this prostitute madam that evidently was shaking down somebody that was a client. Okay?
It was actually a transvestite prostitute madam, correct?
Well, I think that in reality the person was not a transvestite, but it actually was a woman. It was just a woman that looked like a guy.
Okay. And it always there was a very mysterious aspect to that case. That I can't believe it was the woman who was the escort service. We used to call the Vatican.
That I don't know. I don't have that.
It's the most bizarre thing because I remember because in between her arguments with the young rich kid who hired the assassins, right? They'd be calling each other back and forth and slashing each other's tires and all kind of crazy stuff. And then they'd be calling each other back and forth 100 times a day. And then in between these calls, there were calls made to the Vatican.
That I know nothing about. What's funny is I don't know anything about it, but I actually read something online about it, but I can't confirm that for you.
Yeah, next time you talk to Manson, see if he knows anything about that. So, okay, so how'd you get involved and how'd you wind up in this book, this Nicholas Schreck book about the Manson family?
Okay, again, working in Hollywood, we've done, obviously, private investigation work for Hollywood celebrities, producers, directors. That's real. And we've done some bodyguard work, and there was somebody that was very famous on television that we had worked for. And that person is actually a personal friend of mine. And they have a following still, 30 years later with their fans. And I had suggested, why don't we go out and shoot some video of you like at the Santa Monica Pier or walking down Hollywood Boulevard to some sites. There used to be a show in LA in the 1980s called Two on the Town. And I said, well, put it on YouTube so your fans can see you at these different places that they might never get to and that you're there with it. And this actor had agreed. And online I had found Stoner Van Houten, who I had come on your show. And he was giving tours of what used to be the old Spawn Ranch. And I thought, I had been there once before, 30-some-odd years ago. And I said, that's probably a good place to start because people would like to see it. Well, the actor couldn't make it that day, so I decided to take the tour. And this becomes a really interesting story. So I show up in the Santa Susana Pass of Chatsworth, where the Manson family had been. And there's a bunch of people there, and I meet this guy, this white guy. He is short and stocky, and he's tattooed from his toes to his chin, and he's got this El Camino, and I'm talking to him, and he locks his keys in the El Camino, and the tour starts to leave to go into the hillside. And I asked the guy, do you have Auto Club? He said, no. And I said, well, I can't leave you here, so I'll call Auto Club for you, and I do. So we're waiting, and we start chatting each other up, and of course, 6 degrees of separation. He knows somebody that I know very well, and I actually get that person on the phone and confirm that they know each other. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. So Auto Club shows up, lets him into his car. The guy had taken the tour before. And so he said, look, I know how to get to where they're going. Just follow me. So, we're going through the brush and through the hillside, and we take the tour, and this guy becomes very friendly with me. Well, shortly after that tour, I'm talking about a matter of days, Charles Manson dies. So this is November 2017. And shortly after that point, this man, who remained nameless at this point, contacts me and asked me if I wanted to meet Charles Manson's grandson, Jason Freeman. And I said, yeah, that'd be kind of neat. And he said, well, what about right now? And I said, you're kidding me. And he goes, no, he's in Hollywood. So I met him at a burger joint. We had a nice conversation. He seemed to be a nice guy. And from that was like in January of 2018. And then from that, I actually got invited by Jason Freeman to Charles Manson's funeral, which was held in Porterville, California on March the 17th, 2018, which opens another can of worms.
Yeah, I know. How many people were at that funeral?
There were like 20 people there, including Sandra Good, who I guess was the only actual real Manson family member that showed up to the funeral. But we show up, so it was myself and two guys. One guy that actually went with us, I had never met him. So there were the three of us. And we show up and we're met by somebody. I didn't know anybody that was there. And they wanted to know, who we were. And I didn't know who anybody was. Oh, Sandra Good was identifiable when I saw her in the parking lot. So I think I am going to the funeral of Charles Manson, that he's already been cremated because he'd been dead for 4 months. It's going to be a fast funeral, like an hour funeral, and then maybe an hour and a half of a reception afterwards, and then we're going home. Well, I get there and come to find out that Charles Manson had not been cremated, that he's in a coffin. That there's a film crew there, which nobody told me anything about. Knew nothing about it. And that they're making this documentary. So, this funeral home is actually rather large. It's in, again, Porterville, California, a town of about 50,000 people northeast of Bakersfield, California. And where we actually first went was like the offices, which is in a building. Then there's a separate building, which is like a garage space and crematory across from it. And then behind it is like a chapel with a long hallway going into it. Well, so we go from the office to this next building with this long hallway. And when they open up the doors, that's when we got in the hallway, that's when I first found out that Charlie had not been cremated. That Charlie was in a coffin, because the funeral director said, look, I turned the coffin around in case you don't want to look at him. And having been a policeman, it was like, whoa, wait a minute. This guy's been dead for 4 months. This is probably not going to be good. And especially if he turned the coffin around. So we go in, and sure enough, it's Charles Manson. I mean, number one, I will take my hat off and bow to the funeral director. He did a wonderful job on Charlie. With that said, it was obvious that Charlie was decomposing, including there was a diaper behind his head on the pillow because Charlie was leaking. So it's pretty sick. And I looked at Charlie and I was like in total disbelief. I mean, total disbelief. And I don't care what people think of Manson, and we'll get into this because it deals with Shrek's book. The man, under our judicial system, he was sentenced to life in prison. The second his heart stopped, his sentence was over. At that point, he is like released from prison. Okay? So at that point, his body should have been dealt with dignity, not put on display. Because anything that you read, Charlie didn't want this. Charlie was into air, trees, water, and animals. He wasn't into embalming fluid and all that kind of stuff, right? So, again, it takes a lot to shock me, but I'm basically in shock. And one of the guys I had gone up there with had brought his dog. Even though it was March, it was a little warm. So I go to my car, I get the dog out, and I'm walking the dog in the local neighborhood. And I'm doing two things. One, I'm doing counter surveillance for law enforcement, and I'm doing counter surveillance for any news media that might be there. There was no news media. There was no law enforcement. Nobody knew that this funeral was going on. The secret was kept. So I go back and I put the dog back in the car, and I thought to myself, maybe I misinterpreted what's happening here. So let me go take a look again. And I go back in, and at this point, in Charles Manson's coffin, I kid you not, are necklaces on his chest, rings. Somebody put their credit card on his chest to be cremated with him. Okay? And the scene is still the same. So there were three women. One was Star, Charlie's fiance. They were like sitting near the foot of the coffin. There were a couple of guys near the head of the coffin. Sandra Good was sitting in the back of the chapel talking to some people. And there were other people there that I didn't know. And right about that time, I get a phone call from my girlfriend. And I was wanting to leave. I just didn't, this was not for me. And I get a phone call from my girlfriend that a construction company that was supposed to be building a wall at my home, they had been delayed for a couple of weeks, had just showed up. And that they wanted money. And I told my girlfriend, well, just write them a check off of your account. When I get back in a few hours, I'll give you the money. No problem. And she said, no. She said, I'm leaving. And it was like, you're what? And she goes, I'm leaving. Well, it turns out, my neighbor had to help these guys and whatever. So at that point, it was a good excuse to leave. I wanted to leave anyway, but I had to. And I basically told the people I got a split, and the guys I went with like threw a fit. And I said, well, look, I'm going to take the dog with me when you're done with the funeral, whatever, and you get back, jump on a ride back to LA with somebody, or get on a bus, and then we'll meet up and I'll give you your dog back. And that was basically it. Well, on the way out, I took pictures of the mortuary from the outside, the first call van that picked up Charlie, and the smokestack of the crematory. And I sent them to Stoner Van Houten and contacted Stoner Van Houten after the funeral was over that night and told them it had taken place. It was either the next day or the day after that TMZ was showing pictures of Charles Manson in his coffin. And because I had given these outside photos to Stoner, people started saying that I had showed up at the funeral to take pictures of Charlie to sell to TMZ, which was not true. That was a lie.
Did you ever uncover who actually sold the pictures to TMZ?
Nobody has admitted to it, but I think that it's pretty clear that because they were filming Charlie and the film that was taken and everything else, somebody from the documentary crew snapped photos. And then there was something else that I didn't realize, is that Jason Freeman was doing TMZ periodically. So he had a relationship with him. So it could have been him, it could have been the crew from the documentary, or even the producers of the documentary. It's somebody in that realm. It was not anyone that attended the funeral, because there was only like 20 people. Because you didn't have a chance. There were people at that coffin all that time, so how would you be able to take a picture of Charlie? You wouldn't be. So that's basically that, and that started a nightmare, and people were talking. They realized it was a private investigator, and it turned into a whole brouhaha. And Stoner on his YouTube show, which is Spawn Ranch Worker, if anybody wants to look at it. Stoner knows a lot about the whole Manson story. Was just railing against me, and this went on for a couple of months. Well, Stoner then states that Nicholas Schreck, again, who is the son-in-law to Anton LaVey, Church of Satan, who then became a Buddhist, who also used to be with one of the early punk bands called Radio Werewolf, that did a film called Mortuary Academy, which is actually a pretty funny little film, and had been a personal friend of Charles Manson's for 33 years. Had written a book about Charles Manson, had done the documentary Charles Manson Superstar, was a confidant at Charlie's, and a friend, was looking into this whole thing. So I said, you know what? I've heard about this guy, and I heard that Nicholas Schreck is really a straight shooter. And I said, I'm glad he's looking into it. And I picked up the phone, or actually I sent an email, and I get a response. I was like, who are you? And I said, look, it's me, Tony Sperl. I'm the one that went to the funeral. They're saying all of this. And I was like, will you take a phone call? And I said, I will. And Nicholas Schreck called me, and the first words out of Nicholas Schreck's mouth were, I knew days ago, weeks ago, that you did not take the photos. And he said, do you want me to take care of this for you? And I said, sure. He goes, just give me a few days, and I'll make sure that this is taken care of. And then from that on, developed a relationship with Nick. It turns out we both went to the same high school. He's 4 years behind me.
I got a quick question for you, Tony, though, because if you're in this book, the book, The Manson File, Myth and Reality of an Outlaw Shaman, that book came out in 2011. How did Schreck write about you in 2011? Because you didn't meet you until 3 years ago.
He rewrote the book.
Gotcha. Okay.
That book has now been rewritten, and it's being re-released with updated information dealing with the death of Charles Manson, and we'll get into it.
Gotcha.
and civil suits that are flying, and there's a lot of stuff going on. So,
and with this incident where you were being accused of taking this picture, that got pretty serious. You were concerned for your life, right?
Not concerned with my life, but I didn't appreciate people handing out my home address on the internet. I'm not hiding from anybody. I mean, I've said this many, many, many times. I'm not hiding. If you want to find me, you can find me very easily. Even on the internet, you can come up with my phone number. But through Google Earth and some other things, there were showing pictures of my home and my car in the driveway and just saying crazy stuff. But I was not concerned that somebody was going to come kill me because, quote, the real inner circle Manson family doesn't exist. I mean, those people are all in jail. And we'll get into this because that basically is the meat of Nicholas Schreck's book of what really was the Manson family, or what they call the Family James, and the myth and reality of really what happened. But what I wanted to go back to was, what I was finishing with is, it turns out that Nicholas Schreck and I went to the same high school. Now, I was in the regular part of the high school. He went to a thing called the IPS, Independent School, or Independent whatever, which was their own curriculum. So technically, if you wanted to speed up getting out of high school, you could. If you wanted to take it in lesser bites, you could. One of the original punk bands was the Germs, with Darby Crash and Pat Smears. Pat Smears' parents lived 3 doors down from a property I own, still to this day. And Darby Crash, I knew him long before the punk thing. He was a little surfer guy with long blonde hair and screwed up teeth and an attitude you couldn't miss. That's how I met him in high school. And then later, obviously, he got into the punk scene and shaved his head and dyed it black, and at 21, he died of a heroin overdose. Well, both Nick Schreck and I knew Darby. I knew him as Jan. I mean, his real name was Jan in high school. So we had common friends. So what then ensued after this funeral debacle, again, that should not have taken place, and I guess after I left with the funeral, they went ahead and cremated Charlie. They took him up into the hills outside of Porterville, and they cast his ashes. Now, I want to throw out a couple of important points, including one of the people I took there wound up with Charlie ashes. He had them on his clothes. That was documented because the wind blew it all over him, his hat, his jacket, and he had some ashes that he took, which he later sold.
Right.
And other people evidently did too. So, which I
how much did they get? How much did they get for the ashes? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I know that some of the now the guy that I'm talking about. Let's even go further with this. The guy who I really didn't know, but he knew somebody I knew. That guy has been in the Los Angeles County Jail for the last 2 years. He is facing 270 years in prison for 6 rapes. He was a serial rapist. And what's so crazy is he was in this documentary that they produced about the Manson funeral. He's in it. But when we were at Spawn Ranch, and I think Stoner might have talked about this, he refused to be photographed. He did not want to be in any pictures. Okay? And now I have found out, because I've been following this guy's, he hasn't even done a trial yet. Because of his DNA, there's a warrant for his arrest from Texas also. He's on hold for that. Even if he was to skate on all the charges here, they're going to extradite him to Texas for trial. So that's another, twist in this whole kind of a thing that was going on. But no, he was the one. He actually, what he did was, I didn't even get one. I want you to understand something. I took nothing from that funeral, and there were people within the Manson clan that I know were kind of angry with me that I didn't take the what do they call it, Ed? At the funeral, that there's like that little pamphlet funeral notice thing.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't take one of those. I didn't take 10 of them. I took nothing. I didn't take the donuts that were there. I didn't take the coffee that was there. I didn't steal flowers off of Charlie's coffin, which people did. I didn't do anything. I touched nothing. It was like, this is a circus. This is not a funeral. This is a circus for a documentary. I want nothing to do with it. I believe in karma. I'm done with it. I'm out of here. And I left. Well, this one guy I'm talking about that I went with evidently took flowers. He took a bunch of the pamphlets. So when he got back to L.A., the first thing he did evidently was go to Hollywood and sell one of those funeral pamphlets, I believe for $400. He was selling ashes. He's allegedly sold fake ashes to a guy who does blood paintings. He's a tattoo artist, and his street name is Lion Almighty. And he did 4 blood paintings of Charles Manson. And he got ashes from this person I'm talking about. In exchange of the 4 paintings, the guy that gave him the ashes got one of the paintings, and he turned around and sold the painting, and I think he sold that for $2,000. So I'm not sure how much the ashes actually went for, and there are other people that did turn up with ashes of Charlie's. I had also heard through my connections that in the 4-month period of Charlie in a refrigerator, that there were like carnival sideshows that had offered $80,000 for Charlie's body, that they were going to put it on display. They're going to put it in a freezer and let people look at it. And then, of course, we get into the narco cartel people, for one reason or another, and we'll get into this in a minute too, wanted the ashes of Charles Manson, and they were offering a fortune for his ashes to be used in rites of sanctilia and stuff like that. So, really some very strange things going on. But again, in the death of Charlie, during the life of Charlie, people made money off of him. And in the death of Charlie, they were making money off of him. And I was one of the persons that did not profit from him one bit. So anyway, going back to, so I get to meet Nicholas Schreck, and Schreck and I sat down, and I was in L.A. when these murders took place. I was young, but I have a lot of connections, shockingly enough, to the Manson family in different ways. As you probably know, my father not only was a cult film actor, but my dad was the marshal of Los Angeles County. So in November of 1971, after driving my dad nuts, because I used to live in the courthouse with my dad, and I remember the Manson girls sitting at Temple and Broadway on the corner next to the courthouse, and wanting to, go talk to them, and my father would say, no, you stay away from those people. You don't need to be close to them. Well, one Saturday, I go to the courthouse with my dad, and my dad told me, today you can't run around the courthouse. And it was like, well, why? And my dad said, well, they're having hearings on the Manson case. And it was like, what? Now, by November of 71, the original Tate LaBianca case was over. But there were other murders, like Shorty Shea, and like that. And what had happened was, and it wasn't until a few months ago that Nicholas Schreck set me straight on all of this, because I often wondered, what the hell was going on in November of 71? Because, the trials were in 1970, more or less. What had happened was Charles Manson's lawyer was filing, or lawyers were filing appeals. They were ready to get rid of him. He had taken all these convictions. They wanted him to go to state prison. The district attorney's office, the court system, was done with Charles Manson. So they decided not to take up any more weekly court time and decided to hold a hearing on a Saturday to hear all his appeals. And then just a matter of a few days later, when the judge denied all these appeals, Charlie was sent to San Quentin's death row. So, I'm hanging out in Marshall headquarters office, and that's when my dad, said, "Come on." I said, "Where are we going?" He goes, "You're going to get your wish. You're going to get to see Charlie." So I got to actually basically see Charlie being taken out of the courtroom out the back. And he was not the Charlie that everybody thinks, doing goofy stuff and everything else. He was intently focused on his lawyer, and he didn't have the long hair and the beard. And he was a little guy. It's kind of fascinating. It was kind of like, am I really looking at the right guy? Was kind of my real response. And then years later, being actually at his funeral, standing there, it was kind of, both of them were very surrealistic. Standing there looking at dead Charlie and then remembering as a little kid seeing him in a courtroom. So I've never, met him or communicated with him or anything like that. Very strange. Very strange. So,
what else does Shrek have to say in his book?
Okay, so that's what I'm getting to. So Nicholas Shrek actually thinks like a private detective. He's got a really good rational mind. And what he says in the book, point by point, and hopefully he's going to come on your show, is that he details that Charlie, your audience is going to love this, something that even as a kid I thought to myself, and listening very carefully, how did some guy that got out of prison in 1967, the murders are in 69, okay, that's a 2-year period of time. Charlie gets out of prison, he goes to San Francisco. He hooks up with Mary Bruner, who's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin. She's a librarian at UC Berkeley, right? Berkeley, where the geniuses go. Okay? She leaves her job for him. He's bebopping around the hippie scene in San Francisco, doing the coast. And that chews up 9 months a year. Arrives in Los Angeles, puts together a hippie cult, takes over the minds of these young people, and then does these 2 nights of these murders, besides Gary Hinman and before and Sword Shea, and allegedly a bunch of other people. Doesn't make sense. It just does not make sense. Oh, and on top of it, has all these connections in Hollywood and is working on a career as a songwriter and a singer. Nicholas Shrek's got the answer to all of that. Charles Manson originally arrived in the book, arrived in Hollywood in the 1950s. Charles Manson was a pimp and a drug dealer. Okay? Through those contacts, he had Hollywood contacts there. And if you read the book and you listen to him, I'm going to overview this, terribly overview this, but I'm going to overview it. There are organized crime connections involved here, too. Charlie obviously has been in federal prison for a long time. He knew a lot of organized crime type people. So that's what gave him entree into Hollywood. Then he goes back to prison. So when he gets out and spends a year in San Francisco, when he gets back into Hollywood, he still has connections. He's got connections to people that are here. I think that what the book is really talking about is, and there's an ongoing investigation that Shrek is working on. As a matter of fact, I'm assisting him. I've interviewed a lot of people. That Charles Manson was never a hippie. He had long hair and a beard, but he was not a hippie. Charles Manson was a pimp and a drug dealer. Charles Tex Watson was also a drug dealer. He worked for a guy who made wigs, who allegedly was a front for selling drugs. As you probably saw that came out within the last year, the assistant to Jay Sebring finally came out and said that Jay Sebring was basically a drug dealer, besides being a hairstylist. And if you remember, LAPD's first initial response to the Tate LaBianca murders was what? Drug deal gone wrong. These were drug murders.
Well, what about those stories you hear about snuff films and S&M tapes and stuff like that being filmed over at the...
that is an allegation that Shrek has worked on for a long time. Because I don't want to get sued.
Yeah.
I have been told that Roman Polanski is big, very litigious on suing anybody that attacks him or Sharon, reference their personal lifestyle. And I think that, and we'll get into this too, there's the Hollywood movie maker, the Hollywood machine, their propaganda that they put out. And what is the propaganda on Sharon Tate? Basically that she was a pregnant virgin, which is not true. Okay? I interviewed somebody that the first time that they used drugs was at that house, not that house with Terry Melcher, because he was there first, was at that house with Sharon Tate. First time they used drugs was there with another actor who will remain nameless, is still alive, who I've also tried to interview and refuses to talk to me. So Polanski doesn't want that coming out. Do we know that for a fact that was going on? We don't. But those are the allegations, that there were all kinds of crazy things going on in that house, again, after Terry Melcher moved out.
Yeah, and real quick, too, because we're running out of time. But you've seen that screenshot of that INS report that Maury Terry was passing around there, it talks about the Sirhan Sirhan was at drug and sex parties at the Tate house. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I don't believe that to be true. And as a matter of fact, let me throw this in. One of the deputies that guarded, I worked for him. He was a private investigator too. One of the sheriff's deputies that guarded Sirhan told me all kinds of stories. Sheriff Peter J. Pitches was personally meeting with Sirhan. He was in a special place. If you were not on the list as a deputy or anything to do within the sheriff's department, it was limited contact. And even the deputies who were with him were not allowed to say one word to Sirhan. But the sheriff himself was bringing him candy, talking to him. He was an eyewitness to Sirhan doing Sirhan was very quiet, very cooperative. Sometimes he was doing crazy things. Anyway.
Like what? Like mentally insane things, like this stuff, like someone under hypnosis or mind control would do?
That was what I was led to believe. Right. And then he just, this story was told to me. I worked for the guy. He became a very well-known private investigator in Southern California.
Well, Tony, we only have about 2 minutes. We only have about 2 minutes left. We'd have to have you come back and get into this some more. But what do you want to leave us with?
Manson was not innocent, but these were drug murders. That Tex Watson, obviously, Charles Manson did not run a cult. There were a bunch of young runaways hanging out with him. That Tex Watson was in the drug business. That Tex Watson is responsible. Gortek Frakowski allegedly was in the drug business. Obviously, Jay Sebring allegedly was in the drug business, accused by his former employee. Okay, there evidently had been a problem between certain drug parties between Frakowski and Sebring, and this was just basically a night of retribution. And then there are allegations that Rosalie LaBianca was selling LSD. So, and it just happens that did you know that the LaBiancas had only been in their house less than a month when they were murdered?
I've spent a lot of time on them. I've forgotten more than I remember. Okay, about the whole Manson story.
They just moved into the home. Actually, do you know that the family members found the bodies and didn't call the police for 3 hours?
No, I didn't know that. Well, probably clean up the
There's
house.
a basement under the house. There was a safe in there, and the safe was open. LAPD thought it had been robbed,
Huh.
and the kid said, "Oh no, there was nothing in there." LaBianca allegedly had mafia connections, gambling debts, and stuff like that. I mean, it's really an interesting if you look into this stuff. And on top of it, do you know that the LaBianca murder house, as of 2-3 weeks ago, went back up for sale again?
I did not know that. But so this is all in the book, The Manson File, Myth and Reality of an Outlaw Shaman. Tony Sperl, thank you so much, man. And thank you for all your help off the air. Help me get guests and stuff like that. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ed. Always a pleasure.
Good night, man.